Greetings. In our last episode, I promised to have a look at all of the active models that exist for the Oberheim Perf X series. Last time, if you watched it, then you'll know why my pointer is distressed. And if you haven't watched it, go ahead and watch it, because then this video will make more sense. Anyway, front and center, of course, we have the Cyclone that we got a load of last time. We upgraded it, did some preventive maintenance on it, and demoed it. Now here are the other members. There's the drummer, which has some very rudimentary AI built in, but actually does some interesting things with fills, variations, and stuff like that. I'm not going to demo it because there are videos out there demoing it already, and it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for me to do that. Next is the strummer, which takes keyboard input and basically converts it to guitar tuning, or assuming that you have a 6-string guitar, and kind of strums the chords, converts your keyboard playing to guitar playing. It's also not very interesting to listen to because, and maybe I'm not using it right, but it sounds a whole lot like the Cyclone. There's also demos for the strummer available, so I won't repeat that. Next is the Navigator, and what that does is it takes certain MIDI commands like patch changes or other things and alters them in real time. MIDI commands, for instance, key down commands, have an associated velocity, and some early keyboards didn't handle that velocity very well because it was so new. I guess the manufacturers didn't know what to do with it, but you can change the velocity curves, which basically is described by a number between 0 and 127. You'll make it linear, logarithmic, inverted, whatever you want. And there's a whole slew of other things. So this is a real-time MIDI command changer where you can have your MIDI commands altered in real time and use part of the keyboard as a controller for the setup. So some keys on the keyboard won't play music, but rather generate patch changes or control changes or stuff like that. Finally, we have the Systemizer, which comes into play when you have a keyboard that doesn't have certain functionality you need. One of the most obvious ones would be a keyboard split, where you split the keyboard in the middle and the upper half plays piano and the lower half plays bass. Now, there are some keyboards that don't have that functionality built into them, but if they are multi-timbral, then you can use the Systemizer to automatically tell it that you want the upper keyboard to play this and the lower keyboard to play that, and basically you can extend the functionality of a keyboard by adding new functions to it that it does by using existing functions, by chaining existing functions on a target keyboard. Now the two of these are completely boring to demo because they just are. I haven't found any demos of it, but think of these two as something that takes MIDI input and messes around with the commands the way you want it to mess with the commands, and then sends them out the other end, and voila. You can get your keyboards to do almost anything you want. Now there was a 6th Perf X module announced. I mean, they actually had an advertisement here with the catchy catch line of garbage in, harmony out. So it took whatever input you had and tried to make sense of it and created harmonies based on what you were entering into it. So note, this is not like the Cyclone, which took what you put in and then broke apart the chords and did wild and wonderful things with it, but rather it takes a chord and applies music theory to it. I know that's kind of a bad description, but the only reference to it I could find was this ad that obviously that came out prematurely because this was never released to the public. And so there are really 6 of these things out there, but there's very little discussion about the coordinator, and the ROMs aren't available. Nobody's leaked them. But if anybody out there knows someone or has these ROMs, I'll be paying big bucks for them, at least 5 or maybe even 6. And we can convert one of these to become a coordinator. Remember, all you got to do is change the ROM and change the sticker. And changing the sticker is going to be the most difficult part, because I can't even make out on this ad what the menu choices are. So here's a full stack of the Perf X modules. MIDI is, the MIDI topology is daisy chained. So what it means is that if we have a master keyboard running this guy, we go in here, then we come out, go to the second one, the third one, fourth one, fifth one. And that already makes things somewhat messy. The MIDI transmission speed is 31.25 kilobaud, and with some heavy playing and daisy chaining this many devices, I think propagation delay becomes an issue, or can become an issue really quickly. Also, it's a wiring nightmare. You need MIDI patchers, routers to be able to connect them exactly the way you want to whatever output you have, and there are many permutations of how to connect them, and it becomes messy. So putting something like this in your permanent MIDI setup is difficult and inconvenient. Now, wouldn't it be nice if we had all 5 of them in a single box? Now, the downside, of course, is you can't run them simultaneously. Obviously, you cannot completely change the functionality or shoehorn the functionality of 5 devices or 5 CPUs into one. But this is a quick way for you, using dip switches, you can change which Perf X device you want and start using it. This is much easier to put into your MIDI setup. And my suspicion is that there's not too many setups that use multiple Perf X modules simultaneously. And if you want to play drums, you play drums. You want to arpeggiate, you arpeggiate. You're not, I think rarely are you going to use the same setup to arpeggiate, play drums or whatever else at the same time. So as you may have guessed, I built this. And the immediate question that comes to mind is, well, why did you build this thing if you have all 5 boxes? And second of all, why didn't you just build an add-on to one of the boxes that had a bigger EEPROM in it and put some dip switches in there and just make one that could universally be used to be any one of the 5 units? Well, there's 2 answers to that. First of all, I built this about 2 months before a set of the 5 Perf X modules showed up. So I didn't know. I wanted all 5. I wanted to play with them, but I just couldn't. There were onesies, twosies, but they got kind of expensive and, untested, no power supply. It doesn't scare me, but I want to pay a whole lot of money for something that may have been sitting in a swamp for the past 5 years. So anyway, I went about and built this one. Not very complicated. You saw the innards of the Cyclone, and it's very similar to that, obviously. But it's in Cyclone mode right now. The second reason why I wanted to build this was, and for those of you who haven't figured it out yet, the only real addition to this is that it's got a bigger EEPROM. It's got dip switches to select which ROM you want to play. I have the latest of the 5 ROMs, and I also put, for grins, I put some of the older versions on here too. You never know when those might come in handy. But yes, those are the reasons I built this, and then about 2 months later I found a deal, a really good deal, on the 5 that I showed you previously. The second reason is you would have to build a daughter board for the ROMs, and the ROM sits, let's see, RAM. The ROM sits under here. Remember I put the tape here because the ROMs came all the way up. I guess I could cut a hole in here and put a daughter board on it with everything on it, but I like to keep things original. I don't really want to destroy this box. And this was so much fun to build anyway. So I had to do it. So really all it has is a bigger ROM, EEPROM. It has the dip switch for selecting what you want. As an addition, I put foot switch simulators on here because it's got 4 foot switch inputs, fully assignable. And other than that, this ZIF socket here basically will accept a 28256, which is the EEPROM version of a 27256, which can be programmed very quickly. It's basically a non-volatile RAM. So if I ever feel like writing new code for this, well, all I'll need is an assembler, days and evenings and weeks of time. But the turnaround when writing code would be relatively quick because you can program one of the EEPROMs in like 5 seconds, plop it into the ZIF socket, turn it on, and see what your code does. You can't debug it in real time, of course. Well, you can't debug it in false time either, but if the next time I get bored, that's probably one thing I'll try out. So changing what this device is, the software is easy, you change the dip switches, but what about the instruction? Well, that's not too hard either, because I got a bunch of them here. So, you know, the Cyclone, the Strummer, the Drummer, the Systemizer, and the Navigator, if this ever comes off. There. So that's total time required is probably on the order of seconds. So for instance, if we want, we're on a Cyclone now, if we want to change, say, to the Drummer, we do this. So where was I? Let's say you want to change to the Drummer. Well, you put the proper face on it. You look in your little table and it tells you that for the Drummer you need to open this switch. Well, you should turn it off. But so it just, why did it say 8? Interesting. It's telling us, oh, it's telling us it only got 8K, and the reason for that is, for some odd reason, I have an 8K SRAM in here. But as you can see, that's how long it takes. Now, if we want to get back to the Cyclone, turn it off, undo the switch we just did, and see that it acts weird. Why? Because it doesn't check the contents of RAM when you turn this on. And if there's anything bad in RAM, it does this kind of weird stuff. But that's easy to fix. All it needs is for us to hold, which one was it? See, that's where this comes in handy. The enable button, we reset, hold the enable button or turn on off. And it comes back, and it's a cyclone now. And the same thing for all of the other models that this represents. So here are the switch settings and the different kinds of ROMs that are in there. The first 5 are the latest versions I had, and then there's prior versions of the same thing here. I didn't have a prior version to the Systemizer and something else, but what do I have old versions for? You never know. If it acts up or something, you can run an older version and see, you know, how, if the bug manifests itself there in the same way and all of that. But yeah, that gives you basically gives you an overview of the 5-in-1 Perf X, and that's it. And here's what it looks like from underneath. As you're probably used to by now, it's wire, with the kind of stuff I built, it's wire wrapped. It's semi-organized, could be better, but at least things aren't going all over the place. Well, they are going all over the place, but I tried to keep things tight. But it works just fine. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you start building stuff too, and if you see something that you really want, an electronic artifact, and you can't buy it or you can't afford it, then maybe you should start thinking about building your own. So leave me a comment, like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.